Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to the ICANN81 Readout. I see there's still people dialing in, so please hold the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Okay, I think we are ready to start. So once again, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to the ICANN81 Readout, highlights and takeaways from the annual general meeting. My name is Lars Steffen. I'm head of digital infrastructures, resilience, and international at ECO. And this webinar is a collaboration between ICANN.org and the ECO Association. And today's hosts are Christopher Mondini. He is Vice President, Stakeholder Engagement and Managing Director, Europe at ICANN. And Thomas Rickert, he is Director, Names and Numbers of the ECO Association. And now the slides are moving. Okay. And before we get things started, I would like to introduce you to our list of speakers today. So today we've got with us Nicolas Caballero. He is chair of the GAC. Hervé Clément for the first time. Welcome on board. He's chair of the Address Supporting Organization. Great to have you. Greg DiBiase, he's chair of the GNSO Council. Philippe Fouquart, he's chair of the ISPCP. And also for the first time, thank you for jumping in on short notice, is Peter Koch. He's member of the ccNSO Council. And also with us, Joanna Kulesza. He's a member of the ALAC leadership team. And last but not least, in the alphabetical order, Mohan. He's chair of the SSAC. Also, welcome for being with us today. Before we jump in, I would like just to go with you briefly through our housekeeping rules. So of course, this webinar is being recorded. The recording will be available after the meeting. For this webinar, the ICANN expected standards of behaviors apply. You are muted throughout the webinar, but of course, we would like to have this webinar as engaging as possible. So you can submit your questions via the questions pod, which you can find on the right-hand side of the dashboard of the GoToWebinar panel. And you can also submit your questions verbally by raising your hand. We will unmute you before you ask your questions. Please state your name and affiliation. I'm happy to discuss whatever you would like to learn and know about this last ICANN meeting. And as always, you always have the opportunity to provide feedback. So as soon as you close the GoToWebinar dashboard after the webinar, you can fill out a survey, which is always good for us to learn what has been the most interesting part of the webinar to learn and improve. And we have a full-packed agenda today, so let's dive right into it. And with this, I would like to give the floor to Chris Mondini to the welcome remarks of this webinar. Chris, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you to ECHO for co-convening this event. It always attracts such a great collection of community leaders and attendees, and I really consider it a way to learn of people's reflections on the meeting, but also an opportunity for people to ask questions about the meeting in a more localized setting. So thank you again for the opportunity. I normally take a moment to give some statistics about the attendance in the meeting itself. We had over 1,900 on-site participants and over 700 registered online participants, so over 2,600. It's not a record, but it is returning to the trend lines we had before COVID of increasing attendance, particularly at annual general meetings. And we had 141 countries and territories represented and 177 public sessions in that lovely, lovely venue of Istanbul. And I don't believe we counted the number of cats on the venue, but maybe one of my colleagues can report on that. We awarded the Tarek Camel Award for capacity building to Rodrigo Gigemde. He is a leader in Smart Africa and a former official of Burkina Faso, very passionate about capacity building and the internet in Africa. So very much in the spirit of our friend and colleague, the late Dr. Tarek Camel. And as it was an annual general meeting, we had the appointment of a number of ICANN leaders. My colleagues here from the different structures will surely report on their new leadership, where they've been appointed. For the board, Tripti Sinha was re-elected, and Chris Chapman was elected as vice chair. Tripti as the chair and Chris Chapman as the vice chair, with two new board members joining through the nominating committee process. One is Miriam Sapiro and one is Amitabh Singhal. And so we really look forward to their contributions. Of course, it's always great to see the diversity of the fellows and the next gen participants. We had 39 fellows representing 36 countries and 11 next gen from the region participating in the proceedings in Istanbul. In terms of content, there were certainly a lot of update sessions related to the next round and a new GTLD program. I was involved in many of those. And there were some plenary sessions, and I received good feedback and will be interested to hear from those on the call. One on geopolitical, legislative, and regulatory issues. And there was also one called Shifting Paradigms, Multi-Stakeholderism, Geopolitics and Infrastructure, Emerging Infrastructure. So really big issues and really detailed policy advance work issues from every segment of the ICANN community. Capacity building was a focus, as was universal acceptance strategy and all the many things that ICANN is working on. But I will leave it to my fellow panelists to report from their perspective. Each of the organizations, the supporting organizations and advisory committees had a lot on their plate. And so I will hand it back with that brief introduction. So thank you.
Thank you very much. And with this, I would like to hand over to Thomas.
Thank you so much, Lars, and thanks so much, Chris, for the introduction. As you've mentioned, we had a lot of additional participants in the convention center. And if you check social media, you will find a lot of cat pictures. So we had a lot of cats sitting in the booths on chairs and just walking through the rooms. And so that was quite a funny moment here and there. Now, we have a lot of topics to go through. And just for those who are joining an ECO readout for the first time, we are not just walking from constituency or stakeholder group to the other, but we would like to make this topic related. So there are certainly some topics that are exclusively relevant for one individual group, but then there are other topics that are relevant for multiple groups. And we will have so-called topic leads that introduce a topic, and then we'll open it up for other panelists to join and add the perspective of their respective group if they so wish. But also, you are wholeheartedly invited to ask questions in the questions part or to make yourself heard by raising your hand, and then we will go to you and open up your mic. Now, without any further ado, I'd like to go to Ram as the first speaker to give us a little report on what's happening in the SSAC.
Thank you, Thomas. I appreciate the opportunity. As always, it's always good to come and present a little bit of what happened. I wanted to focus on really 4 things that happened at the ICANN meeting. 3 of them are directly related to the SSAC and what the SSAC did, and there's a 4th that I think is a really interesting and important new initiative starting up. The first one I want to share with you about is the SSAC presented to the board, to the GAC, to the GNSO Council, to several parts of the community, the findings from one of our expert members, Lauren Wissinger, on AI and its impact on DNS abuse. The short form of what the findings from Lauren's research is that with the advent of AI, we now find that the kinds of phishing emails that you get, in the past it used to be that when you got phishing emails, you could often tell that it was a phishing email. The grammar would be a little off, the English would not be exactly formatted right, the graphics might be a little off. There might be some, little glitches and flaws in the fish that you got that would be a telltale sign that this is not the authentic item. But with the advent of AI, we find that the fish emails that are coming out are actually quite perfect. They completely simulate the original mail that they're trying to fool you into. So that is an emerging evolution in the application of the technology, of the AI technology. The other part that is quite interesting to see is that one of the known statistics is that when a domain name is delegated into the zone, in other words, when a domain name starts being able to be accessible by everybody on the internet, in the first hour or so, about 100,000 emails get sent out, spams get sent out. Each one of them is a phish. And until now, before AI, what used to happen was that those phish emails were based on a single template, and they would be sent out in a mass way. So they would actually be effectively spam. But with the advent of AI, now each email is individualized, customized to you. Not only that, they are automatically translated into the language that is native for you. So we now have, instead of 100,000 spam messages going out, you've still got 100,000 spam messages, except they're all individually crafted and quite beautifully done. So the hit rate is pretty good. Now, the research shows that it's the one successful phish is worth $20,000. So think about how many domain names that single successful phish can buy, right? So what Lauren's research is showing is AI is not increasing the number of threats that are coming from inside of DNS abuse, but it's actually providing a way to increase the velocity, increase the frequency by which you can get impacted, you can get phished, among other things. Now, the good news part of this is that there is actually AI that is being deployed to catch and find AI-generated phishes. So it's effectively good AI being used to hunt for bad AI-generated outcomes, right? So there is work that is going on there. The SSAC doesn't have a paper on this at this time, but we thought this was an interesting development, and so we shared that with the community. So that was the first thing. The second thing that I wanted to share is the SSAC.
Ram, excuse me. Ram, now that we're on DNS abuse, I suggest that we briefly hear from Peter first, because he also has something to share from the GNSO perspective, and after others have chimed in on DNS abuse, we'll get back to you on the other points. Peter.
Sure thing. Thanks, Thomas.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Thomas. And I would like to first thank ECHO and ICANN for the invitation to share a ccTLD perspective here. And from the ccNSO, I would like to add that we have a DNS abuse standing committee, which meets at every ICANN meeting and has a couple of calls in between, quite a wide membership across the ccTLDs. And this time, the committee was discussing a survey that was sent out prior to the meeting with like 50 odd respondents. And the idea behind that was to ask for the awareness about DNS abuse, or we should probably say abuse in general, in the realm of the respective registries. There has been an increase in awareness compared to the previous study from 2 years ago, and most of the CCTLDs, actually, of the respondents who previously said they had no idea about what was going on or had no measurements, now had engaged and would measure and had a good sense of what was going on. And absolutely, the levels of abuse measured with whatever common measurements is below 0.1% in almost all of the CCTLDs. That's probably something to share here. Just to remind everybody, I say that later again, the ccNSO is not designed to shape policy for CCTLDs. So the DASC and like the DNS Abuse Standing Committee and all the other activities are done on an information sharing voluntary basis. And I'll give the mic back to Thomas then. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Peter. I know a bird has whispered to me that Philippe would also like to chime in on DNS abuse.
Well, maybe. Thank you, Thomas. Very briefly on the non-contracted party houses side of things. There's been a constant push from part of the commercial stakeholder group to have a policy response, small p, mind you. So during ICANN81, there's been a lot of discussion spoke with the contracted party house on the results of the amendments to the contracts. Very positive discussion we had, as well as with the board. I think there's some recognition that not much can, not everything can be done at registration, but there's a sense, especially from the BC and the IPC, that there should be a stronger push, in their views, on having a response on some of the DNS abuse within ICANN. Mindful that there are things that are called abuse that may not fall under domain name abuse, as we call it. Thank you, Thomas. Back to you.
Thanks so much. I see that there's a queue forming from panelists. So, Greg, if you will, please.
Thanks, Thomas. Yeah, just to follow up on Philippe, he mentioned looking at kind of the efficacy of the abuse amendments. And I think that is something that the GNSO is going to be looking at in this new year. We wanted some time to pass after the amendments were executed to see, what positive changes came out of those. So we'll be looking at that and considering what policy could be effective. One of the things, for example, that was floated in the past was a smaller targeted PDP on a specific area like phishing. So we don't know what that will be yet, or if policy is the appropriate path, but that's something we're going to be looking at closely in the next year.
Before we move to Nico and then Joanna, for those who have not followed the discussion surrounding the contract amendments, the contracted parties had triggered a process to amend their contracts with ICANN so that contracted parties are required to take action on DNS abuse reports. And this is not an immediate action that will trigger results, but it's meant to cause bad actors that have not been responsive to be forced to react. And that is the hope will then lead to a lower number of abuse reports for these contracted parties, or help mitigate the issue of DNS abuse with these contracted parties. And last time I looked, I think 2 breach notices have been sent to contracted parties by ICANN compliance, to contracted parties that have not been responsive. And the hope is that this will also have an impact on those that are following the scene for them to become more active. So, I guess we all need to be a little bit patient to wait until the effects of these contract amendments will fully kick in. So thanks so much, Greg, for pointing that out. Let's go to Nico now. Nico.
Thank you so much, Thomas. I apologize beforehand because my throat is not doing so well after some boat trips on the Bosphorus. But very briefly, I just wanted to say that I found, and I want to thank, by the way, Ram and his fantastic team for the very good conversations we had during the SSAC meeting with the GAG. As a matter of fact, we discussed not only DNS abuse and artificial intelligence. We also talked about blockchain and the DNS, and some other, and the way forward, as regarding future meetings between the GAG and the SSAC. Even though some members, and I'm not gonna mention their names, but with all due respect to those countries and those GAG representatives who found it extremely technical, extremely boring, because they made sure to let me know that, they didn't particularly enjoy the technical part of, which was not my case, of course. And I would greatly encourage, and thank you again, Ram, for that fantastic session. And just to make sure that it will happen again in the future, despite some GAG members not being big fans of technical issues. Just wanted to mention that for the record. Thank you, Thomas.
Thanks so much, Nico. Joanna, please.
Thank you, Thomas, and thank you guys for having me. I also enjoy these webinars. Also now in my new role as the liaison of the ALAC to the GAG. So I will focus on that part of the cooperation, but when DNS abuse comes into the discussions, it's only worthy for me to mention that the at-large was waiting, and we were happy to note that the informal report was published during the meeting in Istanbul. I am certain that our kind hosts will share the link to the informal report. That was the culminating point of a dedicated project that ICANN supported, analyzing features of malicious domain registrations. We very much look forward to working based on that report with colleagues from the SSAC, and we have always enjoyed working with Ram and his team. The dedicated meeting, I hear, went very well, and we hope for the informal report to be a basis for further collaboration. As the at-large, we always strive to make sure that the end users are updated about both technical advancements, but also policy advancements when it comes to keeping them safe. So this was my hand just to highlight that the study is finally out, and it could serve as a tangible basis next to the full publication from Lauren that Ram already mentioned, for us to work further on efficiently combating DNS abuse. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Joanna. Now, Ram, we can now go back to you. I know that you have a few more topics to discuss. And on the DNS filtering topic, we will pause to give Philippe the opportunity to add a few words. But now, please reconvene, please restart or continue with the next topic, Ram. Thanks for your patience.
Thank you so much. And Nico, I really love the feedback that you're getting. Well, maybe next time we'll make it a little bit more interactive and, get the people who get bored by technical details to be a little less bored, right? Because we want, at the end of the day, the goal is to get them all engaged and get them to understand the fact, we have to do a better job of explaining these things in a way that is understandable by everybody, right? So that's great feedback. Back to the SSAC, we are currently working on two important issues in the technology area. Specifically, we're working on doing a survey and doing a study of open source software that is used in DNS and domain name registration infrastructure. In some circles, this is also called a software bill of materials. And the general idea here is a strong interest in understanding the critical infrastructure, the software that underpins the critical infrastructure for the internet. What are the pieces of it, especially that are open source, and to see if there are vulnerabilities there, to see if there are strengths there, and to present that to the community. We don't expect necessarily to have recommendations coming out, but we think it is important to get to an initial baseline that helps understand just how important some pieces of open source software are in running all of the internet that we take for granted every day. The next thing that I wanted to chat about is also on a topic that the SSAC is currently working on. This is we call it DNS blocking, DNS filtering. It's a similar idea. But we are studying this. The SSAC many years ago put a report out on DNS filtering and DNS blocking. And over the period of time, we've seen that technologies have evolved, and the basic ways by which the DNS is blocked, while they haven't necessarily changed dramatically, the scale and scope of it has changed quite a bit. Probably most notably, perhaps a decade ago, there was a lot more outcry when a country or a region or whatever decided to block a piece of the internet via the DNS. Now it seems to have become fairly commonplace. It seems to have become accepted that for various jurisdictional or geopolitical or other reasons, authorities will decide to block access to various resources by utilizing the DNS as the primary source of that blocking. Now, we don't have an actual report out yet. We're working hard on that, but I can share with you that quite a bit of our conversations are about really pointing out the pros and cons of filtering access to the internet via the DNS. In most of the cases, what we are in our discussions, what we're finding is that this is a blunt force tool. You have regulators and governments who decide to restrict access, say, even in some cases to a single website. They do that by blocking, an entire zone or an entire TLD in some cases. And so we think there is often a disproportionate use of this technique that is just not appropriate in many cases to the actual impact or the actual effect that is expected to be had. The other thing that we're looking to do here is hopefully to point out the significant collateral damage and other harms that come through to trust, to an understanding that when you try to access a resource on the internet, it will actually be available and not arbitrarily blocked. So we're working on this paper. We think it's an important topic and a timely topic, especially in this time of continued geopolitical tensions.
Thanks so much, Ram. Philippe, you wanted to come in on that point.
Thanks, Thomas. Yes, I thought it would be timely at this point to say a word about a discussion we had within the ISPCP on a separate topic, but somewhat related, which is the use of public DNS resolvers, because as most people would know, those public resolvers is one way to get around filtering sometimes. And we had an interesting discussion on the draft report at this point. I think it's a draft by a study which was carried out by Digital Medusa, and that seems to indicate that the use of public resolvers has declined over the last, I think it's 24 months. And the report elaborate. You can find it on the web. The reasons are still being considered, but in favor. I'm not sure that favor is the right word, but in favor of ISP resolvers, which seems a bit odd, given that, as Ram said, generally those resolvers are more constrained because they fall under certain national jurisdictions. An obvious question I had at that point was, what about the VPNs? Because that's the other way that people get around filtering. I'm sure that's something that will be investigated. But we had a really interesting discussion. That echo what Ram has just said in terms of, you know, this not being the silver bullet and being somewhat too broad in terms of the action you've taken versus the actual harm, which is generally not within the whole domain name. Back to you, Thomas.
Thank you so much, Philippe. And by way of shameless self-promotion, let me direct your attention to the post that Lars put into the chat. ECO has recently published a video explaining the effects of blocking and why this is not the best of all solutions, if I may say so. It's available in German and English, and recently it's been localized to Finnish. So FICOM has asked whether they can use it. And if any of you are interested in localizing this for your local communities, please reach out to Lars or myself, and that's possible, no problem. Ram, you had one more topic to cover, please.
Thank you so much, Thomas. The last topic, which was not SSAC, but I thought it would be useful for the community to hear about, is a new coalition that has just got a soft launch at the ICANN meeting. This is the Coalition for Digital Inclusion, or CODI in short, and this comes out of a realization that there are many organizations that are focused on digital inclusion efforts. And these organizations include governments that are spending millions and millions of dollars or their local currency in connecting the unconnected, bringing access, bridging the digital divide. So there is a great deal of focus that goes into that. The question is then moved on to, okay, you have connectivity, you give them devices, then how do you make that access meaningful? And meaningful access, meaningful connectivity really converts into providing these new people who access the internet, providing them the ability to navigate the internet and be able to access the resources that are most essential. When we've spoken with folks especially regulators and governments, they have a strong desire and a strong need to reach all segments of their populations. And in addition, for efficiency's sake, governments are moving many services online. The design problem here is that language is often not a design parameter when it comes to digital inclusion. So this Coalition for Digital Inclusion is just getting started off. It kicked off in a soft way at the ICANN81 meeting. A formal launch is scheduled for ICANN82. And the idea behind the Coalition for Digital Inclusion, the vision for it is that everyone ought to be able to navigate the internet in their own language. Now, this goes beyond the technical pieces of it. This goes beyond universal acceptance or internationalized domain names or internationalized email addresses. This actually goes to a fundamental thing. Once you have people connected, once you have people who are online, when you have, even at the infrastructure layer, when you want to tell them how to run a router, how to run resources that are important for the internet, that material is often not available in the language that they understand. So this is not a coalition that is going to do translations in all languages. Instead, this is a coalition that intends to provide resources for organizations that already are doing the last mile, that are already doing the work on digital inclusion, but don't have the resources or don't have the research that shows the power of language as a key component to accelerate and improve digital inclusion. So this just got started off at the ICANN81 meeting, and as I said, there's a plan to do a full-scale launch at the ICANN82 meeting in Seattle next March. Back to you, Thomas.
Thank you so much, Ram. And I suggest that we move to the next speaker, which is Peter Koch, immediately, because we've already exhausted a third of our time. Peter, over to you.
Yes, sure. Thanks again, Thomas. I'm happy to continue with the report from the ccNSO. And while I mentioned the DNS Abuse Standing Committee, there is at least one other group that has mostly a coordination function. We call it TLD Ops, and it consists of a few number of mostly security people from the ccNSOs that come together to exchange information. But this time, it was even more interactive. There was a tabletop exercise dealing with a hypothetical attack from various angles, technical, managerial, communications, and regulatory. It's a card game, so to speak, and people were grouped around tables in mixed settings. So people from policy from one TLD, ccTLD, would work together with technical people from the second one, and maybe the legal people from the third one. And this goes through multiple rounds. We were 60-odd participants in total, with a larger number of tables. And yes, the general idea was to practice this and prioritize things and then come to conclusions without actually digging out laptops or anything. So it's a purely, as I said, tabletop exercise. Whenever that's done, it's usually quite fun. And so was this time. People were very enthusiastic about the exercise and were interested in carrying this forward or taking this home to their TLD registries to practice with their own team or spread the news about this. So this is definitely, this was a large session worth spending time in. Next one may be some internal things others have mentioned, elections and leadership. There's a board seat. ccNSO has 2 board seats like the other SOs to fill. And currently there is a vacancy for board seat 12. We have 2 candidates, Byron Holland, the CEO from CIRA, the Canadian registry, and Nick Wenburn-Smith, the General Counsel of Nominate UK. There will be an election, and there have been interviews and conversations during ICANN81, and now the process is going on, including all these background checks and everything, and then we will have the choice between the 2 and the election sometime early next year. Also, we had a conversation with the board, usual bilaterals, talking about ICANN finances, of course, but also, while I mentioned that the ccNSO doesn't make policies for the ccTLDs themselves, we do develop occasionally, we do develop policy for ICANN. And the latest that we did were the retirement of country code top-level domain names, review mechanisms for country code operators, and the IDN ccTLD selection and deselection. And we are stuck with the review mechanisms at the board, and we had a conversation, and we learned that things should progress real soon now, but there were some more fundamental questions that might be of interest to others as well when it comes to timeliness of these processes. That may be on those formal things. Another group that we have that is not yet and may never be a policy development group is a working group on potential policy gaps, the PGA, the ccNSO Policy Gap Analysis Working Group. Now, what does that mean? We are not very eager to define policy just for fun and profit, but from time to time there are issues brought forward either by PTI/IANA, or you might have heard them in other circles like the GAC, or in broader ICANN news and news from IANA. For example, the Lebanon case, where a ccTLD operator suddenly was no longer able to fulfill their duties, and IANA stepped in helpfully, but there was no process. IANA did this with common sense applied, and the ccNSO afterwards also agreed with that. But there is the question, should more guidelines be framed here? Also, a couple of other questions about engagement of ccTLDs in the ccNSO, and so on and so forth. We have a long list of questions. The working group is walking through these and working on potential responses, either saying, well, this is not a policy gap, this is inside the current policy, It needs a working group within the ccNSO, or maybe even, but that would be a big canon. There might be questions that would justify a cross-community approach, which was last done, by the way, for the framework of interpretation in the context of IFC 1591. So that is not happening every year, but this is the potential tools in the toolbox, and this is what we're working on policy-wise. Finally, maybe, because WSIS plus 20 has been mentioned, we had a presentation, a conversation with the GAC about the role of CCTLDs in WSIS plus 20, and it turns out that many of us registries have a function in our local IGFs, running secretariats or convening the local IGF, and therefore also being involved in the WSIS plus 20 process. But there was also the Global Digital Compact earlier this year, and many of us engaged, and so there is an Internet Governance Liaison Committee in the ccNSO where we exchange information about where we are, where the processes are, where we can join forces, but also to understand where maybe in different regions there are different perspectives on these internet governance topics. Again, information we shared both with the GAC and with the board and amongst each other in a specialized session at the ccNSO level. In that context, if I may, I'd like to mention what we call TCCM. It's a indefinite article. It's a technical community coalition for multi-stakeholderism that consists of a bit more than a dozen CCTLDs, registrars, and some organizations from the numbering community. And what we, excuse me, what we're trying to do here is act in the consultation phases of processes like the Global Digital Compact, where on short notice it was important and necessary to give the technical community a voice. And this is, again, the indefinite article. It's a voice, but the learning was it helps if we join forces and respond to these consultation processes, or sometimes where necessary, even outside these consultation processes, if we do that in a coalition rather than so many actors acting all on their own. It definitely was well received, and we got we got contributions into the GDC, as I mentioned, but also the CWG Internet at the International Telecommunications Union. And we plan to continue this path forward throughout 2025, eventually hitting the WSIS plus 20 final process end of next year. And of course, there's a couple of, there's a standing invitation from members of the technical community to join. There's a statement of purpose. You can find all of this at tccm.global. Mind the GTLD there. And I would also be happy to share further information if anyone's interested. And I think that would likely conclude my contribution. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you so much, Peter. And Lars has published the link for the TCCM in the chat, so please do pick that up. And let's move to Philippe now, who is going to give us an update from the ISPCP.
Thank you, Thomas. I'll try and be quick. We had a session on the Saturday of the meeting called a hands-on session, which was essentially for ISPs, where we installed and played with DNS Suite, and that was focused on DNSSEC. We had around 30 people. Well, some of them, I guess, dropped off during the 90 minutes, but that's okay for a hands-on session. Just to mention that we will have a series of webinars on not on the same topic, on DNS, up until March, I think. You can find the details on our website. Everyone's welcome on those webinars if you can make them. We spent some time discussing ICP2 as well, but I'll let my colleague Hervé elaborate on this. Our response is almost ready for that review the addressing policy to create or to qualify, recognizes the word, a new regional internet registry. And we also, coming back to what Peter mentioned earlier, we intend as a constituency to respond to the ITUT's questionnaire on WSIS plus 20, which is due by the end of January, I think. I think we all recognize the need to, for all ICANN constituencies to chime in on this, whether through their national channels when it's an intergovernmental discussion, or even in our own capacity. So that's what we do with this, and we believe that's non-controversial as far as we are concerned, because we essentially support the multi-stakeholder model, and that's what we intend to say in this context. So I'll tell you what, Thomas, I'll stop here rather than using more time, and give it back to you, since I think we're slightly late. Over to you, Thomas.
All right, so we put you on standby, but we might get back to you on the process regarding board seat 13. So that's something that we put on the back burner for the moment. Hervé, you've been patiently waiting. It's your turn. Greetings to Paris.
Thank you. Yeah, exactly. I found this image which for me suited well to the location I am. So thank you everybody to have invited me. So from the ASO, this very strange organization for the ICANN, addressing superorganization, with two heads. First, the NROEC, which is composed of the CEOs of the regional internet registry. You spoke, Philippe, about regional internet registries. That's the regions managing the IP resources first, and Hans-Peter Hollen, the CEO of the RIPE-NCC, is the chair of the NROEC currently. And there is also the ASO Address Council, an emanation from the communities of the regions, and 15 people normally, but nobody from the Afrinic currently, because the Afrinic is facing governance problematic. And this year I am the chair of the ASO-SE. As Peter said about the ccNSO, we are not there to elaborate policies about IP resources, because those policies are discussed and accepted if there is a consensus within the different regions. But we are here for a specific function. The first one, or one of the first one, is the designation or the appointment of two directors of the ICANN board of directors. Currently, we are in the process to nominate the director for the seat 10, currently filled by Christian Kaufmann. The nomination period is opened till the 16th of December, and we accept all nomination except from the Afrinic region, because Alan Barrett from the seat 9 is from the Afrinic. So there's no possibility to have two directors from the same regions. That's the first thing regarding the ASO. If there is a global policy is a policy common from the 5 regions and dealing with the relation between the IANA and the regions. So the IANA is a function of the ICANN dealing with IP resource management. And we are here, if there is discussion about global policy, to see if the process is was followed in a good way. And Philippe, you talk about ICP2. ICP2 is an internet coordination policy. There are currently 3 ICP dedicating to ccTLDs, DNS from the other, and the second one, the ICP2, relates to the criteria for the creation of a regional internet registry. It was accepted, this ICP2, in 2001, it was 25 years ago, 24, 25 years ago, and it was noticed the necessity to update and to consolidate this ICP2. The NROEC I talked about, the first group of the ASO, and so the CEOs of the 4 regions asked us in 2023 October to work on 2 tasks. The first one is to take into account this criteria not only for the creation of the regional internet registries, but also for the verification of the good way regional internet registry are working, and very eventually to use them to register a regional internet registry. In a nutshell, it was requested that these criteria are used for the entire life cycle of regional internet registries. It's something we work at the beginning of 2024 with a document we check coming from the NROEC one more time, and we finish this work in February. And then now we are on the way to update the criteria described in the ICP2, in the ICP2 document. We have not invented something new regarding this criteria, but it was more an update on the completion of them. And it's a document, it's a work we have discussed very actively during the last ICANN meeting. That's the reason why perhaps we had not the opportunity to meet a lot during this meeting, but we had the opportunity to have presentation and to discuss that with the GAC, with the ISPCP as well, with other communities, and general meetings regarding that. So it was a fruitful discussion on that. Thank you for the ISPCP, thank you for the GAC to have accepted to answer the dedicated survey, because we have elaborated a document to update this criteria. And an important part of that is to have the input from the different communities, from the regional communities. That's the reason why there is currently a regional questionnaire online, and I can give you the link on the chat to that questionnaire. And this questionnaire is open till the 6th of December. And at the same time, there is an open consultation from the ICANN regarding this same questionnaire as well, and that is requesting to the other organization of the ICANN to answer this open consultation. And in the same way, it's open till the 6th of December, and the same, we can share the link via the chat. And I hope I was clear enough explaining that. It was the end of my presentation, and happy to discuss it, and I will give the floor to Thomas to continue this very interesting discussion regarding the last ICANN. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Hervé. That was most interesting. And let's now move to Greg to give an update from the GNSO Council.
We have one hand from Philippe.
All right, excuse me for the oversight.
No,
Philippe, please.
That's okay. I'll be very quick. Just to follow up on what Hervé just said. I would encourage people to have a look at the review, not so much to express their support, because I would expect most people here to support the update. But I think the added value is really in the comments that you can provide. One, we have questions within the ISPCP on. Is not concerns, but question as to whether the system, because it's framed as if it's a policy that's more focused on criteria that a potential new regional internet registry would have to meet, and we have questions as to whether the scheme can be gained. It would be unfortunate if a group of people could actually game this to gain recognition by the system. Certainly, it's an academic question to some extent, but it'd be interesting for others to play with these criteria and whether there's an element of risk. So we would certainly welcome feedback from on our response that we've got a draft on at this point, but also encourage others to respond. I think that'd be very good. Thank you, Thomas, and thanks, Ali.
Thank you so much. Greg, it's your turn now.
Sure. Thanks, Thomas. So a couple updates from the GNSO. First, on our elections that took place, the leadership is saying the same. I'm going to continue as chair, and my two vice chairs, Nacho Amados and Thompson Salmonlar, will continue as well. Thomas, should I start with sub-pro because we're short on time? That might be, I think, more interesting than. Yeah, so what's been taking up most of the GNSO's time lately is finalizing the recommendations regarding the opening of the next round of new GTLDs. So, as a reminder, the GNSO develops policy recommendations. Those are sent to the ICANN board, who adopts them or does not adopt them. And if they adopt them, they are sent on to ICANN for implementation. So over the last 6 months or so, we've finalized the 130 or so recommendations regarding the next round of GTLDs. At this last meeting, the board accepted the final report of the EPDP Phase 2 on internationalized domain names, otherwise known as IDNs. And this Phase 2, it covered issues related to second-level variants. So we were happy to have that work accepted by the board with no real follow-ups. And it was great and efficient work by the policy team there. The next wrinkle that is worth noting is regarding a board determination on the private resolution of contention sets, right? So contention sets are when two applicants apply for the same TLD. The board has determined that the private resolution of contention sets will not be permitted in the next round. So in other words, if there's a contention set, it will largely be resolved by an ICANN run auction of last resort. Similar to those held in the first round. So the mechanism for these auctions will be the same as it was in the the first rounds. This stance mirrors GAC and ALAC advice, who were concerned, with applicants kind of gaming the system. And the board also provided feedback at the session that they agreed with GAC and ALAC, but they had also been leaning in this direction, and they were just kind of waiting to see how things developed. This determination that private resolution of contention sets will not be permitted does not contradict GNSO advice on private auctions. There was no consensus recommendation on this point. However, it did implicate one recommendation that had already been adopted, and there was a recommendation that allowed parties to form joint ventures to resolve contention sets. And the board has subsequently decided that actually that recommendation is not in the public interest and wants to unadopt it. So we had kind of a back and forth with the board. The GNSO is not objecting to that, even though there isn't a clear process right now for this situation where the board adopts a recommendation and subsequently decides it's no longer in the public interest. So that's something that the GNSO and the board are going to be looking at more closely in the next year, this kind of process gap where a recommendation was adopted, situations might change that may change the board's thinking on that recommendation. So in this instance, this recommendation wasn't adopted yet or wasn't implemented yet. So the GNSO is not objecting to, I guess it's unadoption for lack of a better term. But I think the bottom line here is that the board has come out has clarified the situation that private resolution of contention sets will not be permitted, and has provided some more background in a letter to the community about how these auctions will work, as well as some options for submitting alternate strings if you think the string that an applicant applies for may come into contention. So those are kind of the main things on SubPro. The high level, we're closing out all the remaining issues related to policy for the next rounds. We're still on track, I think, with ICANN's designation of the next round opening up for applications in April 2026, I believe. Okay, so that's SubPro. I'll stop there and see if people have hands.
So we have Nico's hand raised on SubPro. Nico, please.
Thank you, Greg. Thank you, everyone. I just wanted to chime in very quickly, just to mention that the GAG, we greatly appreciate the board's decision to prohibit the private auctions of contention sets, including obviously private auctions on the one hand, and on the other hand, as regarding the board's proposal, including to provide applicants with an opportunity to apply for an alternative, I don't know which word works better in this case, for an alternative string in case of string contention, and that they also intend to submit, that we also intend to submit a formal communication to the board to this effect. So just wanted, and that's obviously included in the GAG communique, in section, let me recall, I think it's section 4C or something like that, but just wanted to make sure that for the record that is mentioned. Thank you. Back to you, Thomas.
Thanks so much, Nico, and Greg, back over to you.
Thanks.
We have another hand from Philippe.
Yeah, very quickly in the same spirit on SubPro. I just want to mention the excellent work that's being done by the ALT. We had, for example, a discussion on the expert review that will be carried out on community applications, and try and to sort of proofread those criteria to try and make sure that the evaluations are convergent, and avoid discrepancies between the various evaluations, and to avoid obviously questioning the output and the result. That's ongoing work within the IRT. I'm just an alternate there, but I just want to recognize that was done at ICANN81. Over to you, Thomas and Greg. Sorry.
Thanks so much, Greg. Back to you.
Thanks, Philippe. And yeah, that's a great point. Now the work is shifted to the IRT, and they're doing a tremendous amount of work clarifying these recommendations and clarifying what obligations will be for potential applicants. So that's definitely worth noting, that if you're interested in being involved, there's a lot of heavy lifting still to be done on the IRTs related to SubPro. Okay. Thomas, I'm happy to go to the next topic, unless you think we're tight on time and we can.
Please do.
Okay. So go up one slide, I think. Yeah, so there's a bylaw amendment that's out to the board. There's kind of a lot of back and forth that happened on this. So the original cross-community working group on auctions proceeds had a recommendation that said that applicants applying for applicant support cannot use ICANN accountability mechanisms to challenge an ICANN decision if their application is denied. And the thinking behind this was the group didn't want funds that were intended for applicant support going to costs for litigation. So ICANN had originally said, well, and then in this recommendation, they noted that there would likely need to be a bylaw amendment, because whenever you say that someone in the community can't use an ICANN accountability mechanism, that needs to be reflected in the bylaws. ICANN originally took the position that a bylaw amendment was not necessary, and they could simply update the terms of service to the applicant support application. The community pushed back against that. The IPC actually filed a RFR. So ICANN kind of withdrew that stance, submitted a new bylaw amendment that was broader, that said that anytime a cross-community working group recommends that an accountability mechanism be curtailed, a bylaw amendment is not necessary. The community kind of pushed back again and said, well, that seems broad. That may vest cross-community working groups with too much power, right? That the power to amend a bylaw. And so they went basically back to the drawing board again. And now in this last meeting, they've proposed this bylaw amendment that very closely adheres to the original recommendation, right? So that it's a narrow bylaw amendment that said in this particular instance, where an applicant applies for applicant support and their application is denied, they cannot use these accountability mechanisms to challenge that decision. So it seems to comply or align with the original CCWG recommendation, but this bylaw will have to be approved by the community. So those emails are going out to everyone's respective groups to weigh in on whether this bylaw amendment is acceptable to the community. The ICANN board will get their feedback, and I think they are looking for feedback by January 6th, I think is the date, but I think there'll be clear communication to the various groups. And then kind of one side note of interest on this is there was also some discussion around the IPC's request for reconsideration, or the RFR, related to ICANN's original stance that accountability mechanisms could be disallowed through terms and conditions. ICANN had dismissed that RFR on for lack of standing, among other things, and there was some concern in the community that ICANN was dismissing this complaint on a technicality instead of addressing it on the merits. And so that's another thing that was discussed with the board, kind of this encouraging the ICANN board to always consider community complaints or community actions like an RFR on the merits, as opposed to denying them on what some consider legal technicalities like a lack of standing to bring a suit. So sorry if that was overly technical or used too much legalese, but I thought it was worth the update and letting the community know that this new narrower bylaw will be out to the community for approval. I think that's it.
Thomas, you're on mute.
Apologize. No, I was just saying, I think this is of highest importance because it shows that the board has listened to the community's concerns and now came up with a solution that is far more narrowly tailed and not curtailing the rights of applicants unburdeningly widely. Thank you so much, Greg. I would suggest that we go to Joanna immediately. So the floor is yours. You're going to talk about the applicant support program, right?
Very briefly, yes, Thomas, thank you very much. Much has been said already, and the mandate of the at-large is broad, both in geographical and topical terms. We take it as our task to support the applicants. This round is challenging, particularly because we want to make sure that there is a diverse geographical representation, particularly in the underserved regions, particularly by the underserved communities. But on the other hand, as Chris Mondini explained at the very beginning, supporting applicants lies at the top of ICANN's agenda, and there is a coordinated program, including external support, to make sure that the message clearly reaches all those who might be interested in applying for the next round. So from the at-large perspective, applicant support program largely means that we should act, and that's what we take upon ourselves as the facilitators of that dialogue. The at-large participants, our topic leads, are actively involved in all of the policy development processes, but it is our at-large structures, ALSs, that are endowed with the commitment to make sure that end users within their geographical or thematic scope are well informed of the next round. There is a steep learning curve. It is not easy to carry that message, as was just explained, for example, with SubPro, with the technicalities around the next round, to an everyday user. So in that sense, we find ourselves in a particularly challenging position, but with the support from ICANN.org and working with different groups within ICANN. I appreciate RAM putting focus on universal acceptance, on underserved regions. To me, this also rings as a well-known sustainable development theme. We want to make sure that we use all the tools in ICANN's inbox in ICANN's toolbox to make sure that underserved regions and underserved communities are well supported. So in that sense, the at-large is on the ground, making sure that all the tools available through the applicant support program, including legal support, including reduced fees, are not only used by the community, but also well communicated to them. Now, this can be done through different avenues. We've had these conversations throughout the meeting. This could be little things like translations put into the national language. That's something that the local ALS here, the Lot Cyber Hub, has done for our community. The Polish translation was just put online. Very simple. The handbook that's available is now also available in Polish. I know that the German translation is also out there. There are always these little challenges, both linguistic or legal, when you look at the way that the applicant support program is structured. But it is our job to start that conversation and to point the applicants into the right direction to make sure that they benefit best from the applicant support program. I realize, I just look at the clock, we're running out of time. We have more speakers. You guys have assigned me with 2 topics. I'm just going to try and squeeze the second one here as well. Thank you very much for advancing the slides. All the themes we've discussed thus far fall into at-large's mandate. They are all currently connected to supporting applicants. So this is just a very broad message to highlight that the at-large is actively involved both in policy development processes, but also in working with ICANN staff on the ground to make sure that we have a comprehensive message that is ready to be absorbed by ALSs and individual end users. But this brings me to the second point. I appreciate Chris mentioning at the very beginning that 2 general sessions organized in Istanbul received positive feedback. We have not yet discussed, and I welcome the opportunity to be the one to bring it onto our table, geopolitical issues. As an international lawyer, I view this as a legal matter. But within the multi-stakeholder community, we have experts coming from different fields. It seems like we're looking at the same processes from very different perspectives. I'm going to take this opportunity to thank RAM for moderating the Shifting Paradigms session that was proposed by the at-large and GAC to communicate a message of confidence, but also of concern. There is a very recent blog that was just published by Veni Markowski. The criticism that comes towards multi-stakeholderism does come from those who would benefit from that criticism and whatever it might hold. So it is important for us to look at those actors and make sure we address these concerns before they gain prominence, before they are advanced. So for the at-large, from this perspective, there are a few trajectories to pursue. And again, we are very excited to work hand in hand with the governmental engagement team from ICANN.org. The topic that we have spent a lot of time during our bilateral with the GAC discussing, and I very much look forward to Nico's intervention, was WSIS plus 20. I have heard it mentioned before. It seems to be the nearest opportunity for the ICANN community to work together and convey a clear message. I've heard Peter discuss this at length, and it seems as if there is general consensus about the need to not disregard the picket fence, but make sure that the message around multi-stakeholderism reaches beyond it, for example, through UN processes, ITU negotiations, standard settings, and every other infrastructure-related technical discussion that might impact the work that we do. So in that sense, the shifting paradigms session was of importance to the end user community. We welcome the updates from the governmental engagement team on regulatory developments, but we want more. So as agreed with GAC leadership, we're looking forward to building on that format to make sure that the community does have a targeted approach towards whatever regulatory advancements might come and wherever they might originate. We will definitely start with WSIS +20, then there's the Global Digital Compact, but we appreciated the governmental team also updating us on UN processes, the Cybercrime Convention, cybersecurity discussions, both in Europe, and Thomas and Lars and the team have done an amazing job around NIS2 and how it will impact the DNS industry. So we want to make sure that this discussion proceeds and we have an informed conversation within the community that allows us to formulate a clear message to communicate further. These are usually very technical conversations. I've heard Nico reflect on complaints he has heard himself. And it's not easy for your everyday end user to listen in and understand the correct message that needs to be carried. The bottom line is the multi-stakeholder keeps the internet one and functioning and safe and secure, one world, one internet, as ICANN's motto would be. So in that context, we put very high on our agenda communicating that message and making sure that we have a fruitful and efficient discussion. I also welcome Ron's reference to the Coalition on Digital Inclusion. There is a narrative to be built around sustainable development and the work that we do, making sure that the next billion that joins the cyberspace, that gets connected, is welcomed in an open and uniform multi-stakeholder community. I'm going to stop here. There are a few practical steps we will proceed with also in terms of facilitating that conversation within the community and communicating the messages beyond, but I'm mindful of the time. We have 8 minutes and 53 seconds. So I'm going to stop here and let the other speakers take the floor. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Joanna. That was great. And the last speaker, last but not least, I should say, is Nico, who's going to give us some more information from the GAC. So over to you.
Thank you so much, Thomas. I'll try to be quick. So I've already, I've already spoken about the sub-pro, the contention sets and what the GAC thinks about that, and the advice we have already provided to the board, and so on and so forth. So I won't bore you with more details in that regard. I just wanted to very quickly, in a nutshell, mention something about SOIs. This time we didn't give any specific advice to the board, but we did talk about that during the sessions in Istanbul. In a nutshell, I just wanted to say that the GAC, strongly supports transparency within ICANN, and that we basically consider, we consider it inconsistent with the bylaws if any ICANN participant is permitted to decline disclosing who they actually represent. That is something especially important to governments. As you all know, every single GAC representative is always, identified and they need to clearly explain. I mean, that goes without saying, right? I mean, if Nigel Hickson represents the UK, we all got to make sure that is actually the case, and it is indeed the case. But it might sound, extremely basic, but Unfortunately, that is not the case in some. I'm not saying in 99% of the cases, but whatever the percentage is a very important detail for the GAC, and we have already provided advice in that regard. And we also obviously welcome the general ethics policy and code of conduct on statements of interest that is being developed, and it is my understanding that it is still open for contributions. Having said that, I just wanted to give you some highlights, from the communique. It's, we didn't give any specific advice, as I said before this time, but we did mention some issues of importance to the GAC. I'm not gonna refer to all of them. I just wanted to mention 2 or 3, like DNS security. In terms of, DNS security, the GAC, we basically stressed the importance of robust security measures to protect the DNS from cyber threats and ensure its resilience, and that has a direct relationship to what Ram was mentioning at the beginning. It did get some of our distinguished GAG representatives a little bit bored. That was not the case with the more techies, but again, it's important to. And again, Ram, I'm looking forward to another fantastic session like that. The sooner, the better. In terms of universal acceptance and IDNs, we emphasized, the need for continued efforts to promote the use of IDNs and to address technical and policy barriers that may or may not hopefully hinder their adoption. And we have a lot to talk about in that regard, also with Ram and his team and with everybody else. And then the third thing I wanted to mention was, the issue, the data protection and privacy issue. The GAC basically highlighted the importance of balancing, the need for data protection with the legitimate interests of law enforcement and national security, right? And the broader, the general public rights. So, I don't want to artificially extend, my intervention here, and I want to give the chance to the participants to ask questions. But in conclusion, all in all, I could say that we just wanted to underscore the importance of collaboration, transparency, and accountability in the governance of the internet, broadly speaking. One final thing I wanted to mention, and I just want to make sure, I'm not sure Sebastian Ducot is on the call today, but I just wanted to make sure I welcome him as the GNSO liaison with the GAC. Not sure, correct me if I'm wrong, Sebastian, but I think we did mention that during our session with the GNSO in Istanbul. In any case, apologies if that was not the case. So that's about, there's a whole bunch of other things, but there's only 5 more minutes to go. But if that is okay, Thomas, I'll handle the floor back to you.
Thank you so much. That's great. Now, you've been very concise, all of you. That's great. So we have 5 more minutes, which allows me to invite participants to ask questions again. Or does anyone from the panelists wish to make some further remarks or chime in on any of the topics that we've discussed? That doesn't seem to be the case. I would like to briefly add to what Nico mentioned regarding the SOI discussion, that for those who have not been following this too closely, there's been considerable work inside the GNSO to get this SOI topic advanced and resolved, but we have not been able to come up with a suitable compromise, I'm afraid. And the point where the community has failed to reach agreement is when it comes to lawyers. It's always the lawyers that are causing these issues, right? So there were community members who are lawyers who say that they are participating on behalf of their clients in working groups, for example, but that regulations on professional secrecy prevent them from disclosing who they work for. And I belong to the group of this profession, but I think that we need to be on the right side of this, together with the view that the GAC holds. Everyone that takes a position, and particularly when they vote or participate in consensus calls in working groups, should say on whose behalf they are participating. And the processes that ICANN uses are transparent. And if a client sends me to participate on their behalf, I need to tell them during the engagement that my rules of to participate in the game are that I need to disclose on whose behalf I'm acting. And I think that this is important. I hope that we can get this resolved soon, because what we want to avoid is that ICANN becomes intransparent in terms of who is acting on whose behalf and who's influencing the processes. And we don't want any particular interest group to take over the policy making in ICANN's stakeholder groups or constituencies. So I thought I should share to give a little bit of background on where the discussion stands. We have 2 minutes to go. I would like to thank the panelists who've done an excellent job in updating the participants on what happened in Istanbul and all the cats and all that. I should also say that this webinar is archived. So for those who have friends that couldn't join today, there's a possibility to watch this later. We're going to continue this, I'm sure. Thank you so much for the participants for staying with us for such a long time. I hope that we can do a slightly better job on gender balance during one of the next calls. We're always trying to find a good balance, but we're not succeeding on this every time around. But I just wanted to mention that. Thanks so much to all of you. Thanks so much to Lars and the ECO folks who made sure that this all works so smoothly. Have a great day. Bye-bye for now.
Thank you so much. Goodbye, everyone.
Thank you, Thomas. Bye all.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.